welcome to Project Gamma. At Project Gamma, we have smart conversations with smart people across the intersection of entrepreneurship, technology, and cybersecurity. My name is Warner Moore. I'm a technologist and security leader who's helped build multiple business-to-business software as a service companies, and I'm passionate about modern cybersecurity practices. I'm also the founder of GammaForce. At GammaForce, we help tech and health tech companies by acting as their fractional security organization. Today, we have Matt. I met Matt at a VC party of sorts, and Matt was fundraising for his current company. And Matt has a computer science background, having started his career in defense contracting, including a stint at NASA. After 6 years as a software engineer, he decided to switch it up, founding Pixelement, who worked on computer vision for drones. After selling Pixelement, he went into big tech, working on GenAI at Amazon. After nearly 7 years, his family getting older, he decided to dive back into startup life, founding Zaqa. And Zaqa is helping industrial customers through automation with GenAI agents. So Matt's done a lot, having had success with startups. He's done big tech and now another seed stage startup. You were working on AI at Amazon, Matt. There you deep dove on reinforcement learning. What does that mean, and how are you applying it to what you're building now?
Yeah, reinforcement learning from the 10,000-foot view is just the idea that you train the model by giving it rewards for performing tasks. In other words, we're not telling it the right answer, the right way to solve the problem. We're just measuring the success of its outcome, and you use that to compute loss and update the model weights. It's particularly well suited for training for agentic behavior, which the team that my science co-founder and I were leading at the time were a little bit ahead of the curve on that at Amazon. So it's been very vindicating to listen to the leaders of Anthropic and OpenAI talking about how heavily they're leaning into reinforcement learning these days.
Yeah, 7 years ago, that was 2019, right?
So the Amazon time that I'm talking about would have been shortly before I jumped out to Zaqa. So this would have been over the last 2 years during the large language model era.
Got it.
Now, in particular, what we were thinking about at the time is how do you specialize agent performance to specific tasks? So you have a large language model that's generally good at things, but you need it to do a particularly hard task. How do you train that model to do that hard task very well and do it in a way that's economically feasible and allows for a large variety of tasks? So this is the jargon for it would be lightweight domain adaptation. Adrian, my co-founder, he and I spent a lot of time thinking around how do you use reinforcement learning to do that? And a lot of those early thoughts that we had were things we were thinking about as we jumped out to then go start Zaqa, where we're trying to take the ideas behind reinforcement learning and lightweight domain adaptation and use it to build back office automation for industrial customers, where we're focusing on when the stakes are very high and mistakes have actual real world consequence, as opposed to, let's say, a chatbot and a consumer facing product. How do you ensure that accuracy is really high? And how do you teach the model to do things like self-doubt and provide evidence documenting its decisions? These are all the kind of trust things that large enterprise actually need in order to field AI. And we think that part of this secret recipe for making that very successful is a combination of reinforcement learning and lightweight domain adaptation.
One thing that I find really interesting is just and putting more the management hat on, the things we need to do to help our teams be effective. And it could be building effective SDLCs, software development lifecycle, or it could be business operations process for serving customers. A lot of the things we talk about and the way we think about building those capabilities translate to how we can use at least agentic AI more effectively. And I think it's cool you're working on that too, because I talk to so many people who are just trying to throw things at the wall and not necessarily considering how to get the best results from the technology. And if we're not building processes and I wanted to say reinforcement, but ways to ensure we're getting the output we want, we're going to have inconsistent results.
For sure. And it's interesting. One of the things that I took away from my earlier startup experience is the importance of dog fooding. So just meaning using your own product, having a feel for how that product is performing rather than just relying on the customer all the time. And the really interesting and exciting thing about building systems for specialized agentic performance is that you can turn that wheel of improvement on your own internal processes as a company. A lot of what we think about, I feel like the kind of table stakes for what enterprise service looks like from a SaaS perspective has shifted quite a bit. The world where we have like a vanilla platform and that platform is more or less the same for all customers, I think that level of delivery for customers is starting to go by the wayside, and that customer expectations are increasingly shifting towards, okay, the cost for code delivery has gone down. It's not that you don't need software engineers anymore, but we have better tools. We can build faster. So customers expect more, which is pretty natural, right? So thinking about how do you take a product offering and customizing it very tightly for an individual customer so that it really fits their need like a glove? And in order to do that, there's a forward deployed engineer problem, right? So you can build lots of abstractions to support it in the platform, which is a lot of what I've been thinking about as the engineering leader at Zaqa. But at the end of the day, there is some piece where you have to actually do the custom, and that's a forward deployed engineer process. And if you think about using an agent to automate a back office process, you could conceivably say that's a back office process. And a lot of the strategies that you use in reinforcement learning, where you think about, okay, what is the right environment do I give to the agent? So what are the tools that it has to do the task? And then how do I compute success so that I can provide a meaningful feedback signal? You could arguably apply that internally. So we think about not just dog fooding the product that our customers consume, but also thinking about taking these ideas and applying them ourselves to automate our own jobs, and thinking about how we achieve that same magic for ourselves, which produces a pretty virtuous product feedback loop where we feel the successes or pains or failures of the product because we're using it internally to onboard customers onto our own platform.
That's great. In big tech, lots of resources. You're well capitalized at Zaqa for a startup, but not compared to big tech. For a successful technologist who might be wanting to do a startup or get out of big tech, what's some experience you can share for navigating to the startup world?
Yeah, it's quite fascinating having done both. So I went from startup land to big tech and back to startup land. When we worked at Amazon, our compute budget was measured in the 9 digits per year for my team. So, and even then I felt, gosh, I feel so constrained by this budget. This seems unreasonable. I should be able to just run all the experiments I want all the time. What are these accountants doing slowing me down? And then you go to startup land and you're like, okay, it used to cost me $250,000 to run one at scale reinforcement learning experiment at Amazon. And if I do that, how many times can I do that before I burn through my funding? It's not a very big number, right? So you find yourself thinking, okay, how do I achieve the same level of capability in a way that's just dramatically more frugal in terms of experimentation cost? And there's no silver bullet, but one of the things that we think about a lot is what is the smallest testable surface of this experience that we can produce in an experiment? How do we shape reward computation to minimize the cost so that we can realize that kind of minimal testable surface? Which is a very different way of thinking about it than when you're at big tech. So at big tech, it's usually, how can I show the most interesting result to my leadership as quickly as possible? Because they're constantly looking for progress and you're always under the gun to show that with these vast resources, you're doing something. So the calculus is just very different. Whereas in startup land, you have to move really fast too, but you have to constantly be measuring opportunity cost. So one day we may say, okay, we're not going to optimize the inefficiency and inference right now. It's costing us a small fortune every day. But the engineering cost to do that versus, say, investing in reducing the cost of the training loop or the new feature that we ship out for a customer, there's a lot of kind of hard decisions to be made there. And the name of the game all the time is opportunity cost and minimal representative experimentation size.
I like that. In Lean Startup, a commonly cited book, more from a product perspective, the short version of it is, can we sell the thing? Can we create value? It's what's the least we can do to create business value, right? Which is way different than can we show something really cool to the executive team with a 9-figure budget to support a completely different world? What do you think sum up is? I've been and worked in large companies before, and I think in big tech, it can be a little different. The engineering skills tend to be higher, but in the end, most of these companies are just big companies now. What do you think some skills or what's some learning or any version of that you had to develop or take to be successful in the startup world, thinking more just from an individual experience?
So let me restate the question and make sure I'm tracking it. So given my experience in big tech as an individual, what did I take from those experiences and how did I apply them to success in startup life?
Well, I'll be like really direct about it. I've seen tons of corporate folks who just can't do startup work and they move too slow. They're not able to, frankly, just even get stuff done, right? So
Yeah.
that's a very personal thing, though, and clearly you've had success doing it. So I'm more interested in your own experience. Maybe it's skills you had innately, or maybe it was learning you had to have along the way.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I've definitely observed this, right? So when you're at a company that has 10,000 software engineers, there's going to be varying levels of commitment and drive and delivery. And big companies, they tend to accumulate folks that are comfortable in that environment. I think one of the things that makes me a little bit different from the general cohort is it's not that I would consider myself to be particularly smart. I'm certainly less smart than Adrian and Pierre, my two co-founders, but grit is a big part of it and innate drive. So one of the things that I noticed, because Adrian and I had this conversation a little bit when we think about leaving Amazon around, would we succeed in a startup world? I had some experience, he didn't. And what does it take to make it a success? And there's a certain personality characteristic that I think is pretty key to being a successful founder, which is this innate drive piece. So no matter how frustrated or burnt out I would feel at Amazon at any given moment across my long career there, I just could not stop working. I'd be falling asleep and I'd be sitting there thinking about some problem and I'd spring out of bed and the problem was still in my mind and I couldn't wait to go attack it. It's like, no matter how stressful the situation got, or if I was upset with my boss, I just could not stop. There's this kind of perpetual motion feeling inside of me all the time where I want to just keep working on problems. And I know Hadrian very much has that same drive. Now, the grit piece is another one. And I actually think that Amazon does a pretty good job as a test bed for evaluating whether or not you can have this versus the other big tech companies. Now, I've not worked at other big tech, but having talked to friends that have worked at other ones, one of the key differences is that there's just a much more aggressive culture at Amazon. So there's, for good or for ill, they do lots of layoffs. They're always trimming the bottom 10%. So it's a very high pressure where they're always asking you to do more than you can conceivably do. It's not the most necessarily balanced work-life environment, but what it does teach you is how do I ruthlessly prioritize my time when there's simply too much to do, which is very useful for startup life. And then when you're under constant pressure to deliver all the time, that grit piece, you either have it or you don't. And if you're going to have a long career at Amazon, having the grit piece is pretty important to making it not a completely miserable experience.
Great thoughts. I've often said that I credit a lot of the success I've had in my career to not giving up. And that doesn't always land, but no one else is going to do it, right? A small team, startup, if you and your co-founder don't do it, who's going to do it? And if you're not moving forward every day.
One of the things that I learned coming out of the first startup that I think is really relevant to the point you just made is what is the right stuff for a successful founding team? And it's myself, Pierre's our CEO, and then Hadrian, who's our chief scientist. One of the qualities that's critical to having a good founding team that everybody's got to have is they all have to have that piece of grit, that internal drive, right? Because it doesn't matter, this idea that you go out and you have an idea and you raise money and then it just magically you're a billionaire the next day. This is a fiction. That's not how it works, right? The highs and lows of startup life, it's literally day to day. You'll have a conversation with a customer and you'll think, oh God, my biggest customer is going to churn tomorrow. They said something that seemed like they weren't happy. And then the next day you sign a new customer. And then the day after that, you find out actually that enterprise customer likes what you're doing, but they want one thing fixed and they're upset about it. And there's an opportunity to upsell. And so it's just up and down and up and down, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And if you can't get punched in the face by startup life and then show up the next day with a smile on your face, you can have a really rough time of it.
Yeah, that's so true. It's difficult. I've done difficult things my entire career, and it can't be overstated how difficult it is. I think that's why it attracts people, at least those who are more successful with it, who exhibit some of the traits you shared. I think that's a good transition to my next thought. And the first startup, Pixelement, you launched with young kids. Now your kids are a bit older. How have you been able to navigate family life with the demands of launching a startup? And we just painted the demand so very well.
It's it is definitely a challenge. So I think if you're a founder who doesn't have small children, I'm not as sympathetic to hearing complaints about how challenging it is, because to be honest, I think it's just much harder with families. The key I've found to success, and I use this at Amazon too, is basically I have sacred hours. They're time boxed. If it is an absolute emergency, you can get me there during those hours, but I'm going to really test whether or not it's an absolute emergency. And the nice thing about the importance of having a founding team where everybody is just super empathetic with each other and gives each other a lot of grace, because it's a mess and super stressful. You got to have partners that are willing to extend you space when you need it, but having defined hours. So for me, it's at 5 p.m. until my kids are in bed. I'm done. I'm not working during those hours unless it's an emergency. From 8 till 8:45, I'm making breakfast with my kids. I'm putting them on the bus. Those hours are sacred unless you can convince me that it isn't an emergency that needs to be dealt with. So time boxing that is key. Now, for me, what that means in practice is I just have no life. So literally every other hour, I'm working on the startup. That's why I get up at 5, because I can squeeze in some hours there, and then my kids wake up and I'm done for that little block. I work until 5 and I stop. Pierre is a little bit younger than me. He doesn't have kids, so he's going to keep running later into the evenings. It doesn't hurt that we have some geographic spread across the founding team. So Adrian's based out of Paris, France, so he is comfortable covering hours that I don't want to cover because I've got time with family. So blocking off the hours is key. The other part too is it is very hard not to sprint in startup life. And I constantly make this mistake, even with all of my years of experience. It's a day-to-day battle to remind myself. Part of the reason where I've historically been a bit of a night owl, where given the opportunity, particularly in the earlier Amazon days, I would just work until 3 or 4 in the morning. The problem with doing that is you can always say just another half hour, and you get diminishing returns. So at a certain point, you're just not even getting anything done. You're just performing for your own sake. But part of the reason I switched to the morning hours with family life is you can't be dead exhausted when you have kids. So you just got to remind yourself it's a marathon, not a sprint. I'm going to go to bed at 10:30. I'm just going to do it. It's going to hurt sometimes because I'm going to think I really should stay up and just push to get this thing done. But if you kind of force yourself to fall into these time ranges and just be very strict with yourself around not violating them, in my experience, that works best. Sometimes you got to do the all-nighter in startup life. It just can't be helped. But boy, you're going to burn out pretty quick if you're going to do that on a regular basis.
Great thoughts. It's interesting. I've adopted some similar constraints around my schedule frequently. I'll work into the evening, but my cutoff is family dinner. And then usually I'm prioritizing time with them until they go to bed. They go to bed a bit earlier than I do. And then I'll work more, depending on my energy level. I'm very aware of the diminishing returns thing. So great tips. Thank you. Well, with Pixelement, you and your co-founder were both technical, co-founder and CTOs both. What do you learn from that you're taking to Zaqa?
Yeah, so I co-founded the company with my buddy Ben. So he and I worked on the same research project at NASA. He was wrapping up his grad degree. He had a PhD in remote sensing. So he was very in the hard science of the space that we wanted to found the startup in. And I think the large reason that we founded it together was because we were friends, which, it's good to know your co-founder. And as an investor, I think I might be somewhat circumspect and would want a pressure test if you told me that a founding team was completely brand new and didn't know each other at all before. But being friends by itself is not sufficient. Ben and I both, I think I may have been titled as CEO at the time, but I wasn't CEO in practice. And I don't think either of us did that role really. So we were both very technical people. Neither of us were super comfortable going out and selling to customers, which leaves a glaring gap in the founding team, which is one of the things that I love about the current company is so Pierre, he has a bachelor's in computer engineering, but he's not doing the technical side at all. It's selling, it's the customers all day long. If you want to get him in on a product conversation, I got to block some time in his schedule because it's just customers all day long, every day. And with Adrian, I've got somebody who's got a deep, heavy science background like I had with Ben. And Adrian's very focused on that science piece. And it's actually been really fun watching him grow into an engineer. Interesting observation. So before coding agents, applied scientists, in my humble opinion, were not the best use of human capital. You might get 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20 that's going to throw down some genuine science innovation and really drive the direction. But in my experience, a lot of them were just very bad software engineers. But Hadrian with coding assistants, it's been great watching him grow into that engineering capability. And then I've got the engineering side of the house. So it's a very well-rounded team. And again, learning from the last one, focusing on, okay, what are the required and necessary pieces for success in a founding team? You need to have relevant experience, particularly if it's a technical company. You need to have somebody who's going to own customer interaction and is actually excited about that every day. Because again, it's going to be a miserable journey if you're just doing it because you have to, which is what Ben and I were doing.
Yeah, great thoughts. I'm going to be meeting with someone soon where I don't see somebody in their startup engaging in the market, putting the CEO and sales hat on. And I'm going to explore that because if somebody's got to do it. Things don't sell themselves. You exited Pixelement to some success. So what are your thoughts on post-exit versions of winning?
Well, it's interesting. When we were building Pixelement, Ben and I, the product market fit that we originally sought was not coming together the way that we'd hoped. However, we were finding that we were having quite a bit of success in doing basically grant research work. And what that meant is that the company had success. We were generating revenue. There was a path to something successful, but it wasn't what we set out to do. And it certainly wasn't what the investors thought that we would be doing initially. So we went a route that isn't what you read in the news, but I still consider to be a success, where basically Ben saw the opportunity. Okay, he wanted to own this idea of going out and having it being primarily a research-based business. He raised some internal family capital. He bought out me and all of the investors. So it was modest win for everybody involved. And Ben's still running the company today. So this is, 10 years later. Now, what I take away from this is, again, it's a little bit around not letting kind of the theater and kind of public narrative get in your head too much as a founder. Because you hear in the news like, okay, so such and such 20-year-old went out and built $1 billion business overnight, and how they're the richest young founder in Silicon Valley. It's great on the news, but I don't think that's actually the average case. I think it's quite outlier, and that there are a lot of paths to success that are much more likely to be realized, and that there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, if you try to chase that kind of outlier story that's in the news, that may actually contribute to your failure, right? The success is a little bit simpler in that really you just have to ask yourself every day. If you get up every day and you say, am I building something that solves a real problem for my customers? What are my customers telling me about the problem? As long as you focus on that and you keep iterating, the path to success may not look like that news story, but that is the path to success.
I think we get distracted by outlier stories. All of us, especially in the startup space. Not to overemphasize Malcolm Gladwell, but his book Outliers influenced a lot of my thinking to this day. Just as simple as Monte Carlo simulations, where someone's going to be the outlier. If we consider humanity as a big complex system, someone's going to be the outlier. And just because someone's the top 10 wealthiest person doesn't necessarily mean there's some innate attributes. Some folks are going to be the outliers.
Well, and the reality is their luck is a non-trivial component to it. At the right place, the right time, with the right idea, the right resources coming together. There's a huge luck component. For me, it's a challenge. Every once in a while, I'll get tired and you start scrolling on LinkedIn and you see all the kind of performance theater and you start to let it get in your head a little bit. But you got to really try your best to cut that out because at the end of the day, the key to success in a startup is finding signal in the noise and staying really focused on the signal. News stories like this it's just pure noise.
So true. Well, raising capital is difficult, especially with the early stage. You've gotten through it now at Zaqa, and you can focus on building, at least for some months. What would you share to help others on this journey?
So I've been through the process twice, and I must say it went much better this time than last time. Don't get me wrong, I had great investors in the first company. I still have relationships with all of them, love them to death. Uh, Couple things were different. So one, again, Ben and I think this is mostly from inexperience. We spent a long time in the garage building out a hard science product, thinking that we needed to go in and show this hard science product working to investors to get them to invest, which was exactly backwards. So we spent a long time undercapitalized and went to go raise much too late in the game. One of the things that went very well with the second company is Pierre did it the right way where he said, okay, I have a thesis about a problem. I'm going to put on my, my sales development representative hat, and I'm going to go out and start calling prospects and see if I can get any of them to bite. So he spent a fair amount of time showing up to people's offices, having conversations with the C-suite, trying to convince them that the problem was there and that we had something that they wanted to buy. And in the end, I think the key to us raising so successfully is he signed our first enterprise customer. They're a large enterprise customer, multi-billion-dollar revenue. He signed them on the promise. He said, this is the pain point I've observed in my experience. I think you have this pain point. The C-suite said, you're right, we do. And he said, well, what if I could bring you a solution to it that looked like this? Is that something that you'd be excited to pay for? And they said, yes. And they signed a contract just like that, which makes a huge difference, right? So if you come into a VC, and again, I don't think it's that hard if you just try to step back and look at it critically as if you were the investor. And for what it's worth, I actually find that using Claude or ChatGPT is actually fairly useful for this. So just ask it, imagine you're a VC, criticize my pitch. What do you see as the shortcomings? It's an experienced founder would do this on their own. ChatGPT does a decent proxy of it to at least get you started if you're not familiar with it. But everybody has ideas, having a great background. I feel like I have a well-qualified background for what I'm doing. I feel like Adrian has a very well-qualified one. So does Pierre. But there's lots of founders running around with qualified backgrounds. It's necessary, but not sufficient, right? So if you want to make fundraising a success, don't spend a bunch of time in the lab. This is a classic engineering mistake. Go talk to the prospects. If you can't find somebody willing to cut you a check or sign a contract, or at least a promise to cut you a check on the idea, maybe it's not the pain that you think it is, and you don't have to waste a lot of time. The other part too is if you're in the Midwest, again, I love the Midwest investors, but it is a very capital sparse environment relative to the coasts. We raised the bulk of our money from the coasts. Don't be afraid to reach out to the coast VCs. There is nothing saying that if you're based in Ohio, you can only raise from Midwest venture groups. They should be on the list for sure because they want you to succeed, because we all want to see the capital environment and the ecosystem grow. But boy, don't be shy about reaching out to the East and West Coast VCs. It's really not that big a deal, and they'll be happy to talk to you. You may not get past like the first wave if you don't have a great pitch, but I promise you, if you reach out and you try earnestly enough, you will at least get that first meeting.
So many knowledge bombs there. And I'll key into essentially what you described was building a business, which is what a startup is. We can build products all day long, but if we're not building a business, investors aren't going to be very interested because customers aren't very interested for good reason, right? Love it. Well, been a fantastic conversation, Matt. I don't think anyone would believe that this is your first time being a guest on a podcast. So grateful for you being with Project Gamma for the first one. Do you have any closing thoughts, books, or anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
I mean, I guess if I wanted to leave one closing thought, I might just re-summarize kind of what I feel is the key point of what I've said for new founders. The road is super messy. It's very bumpy. You're gonna make literally even with having done this before, I feel like me and my founding team have made literally every mistake that you can make. Even mistakes I've made before, you're gonna keep making mistakes. So keep your chin up, call a mulligan on the day, go to bed, wake up the next day with a smile. If you don't feel like you can do that, maybe startup life's not for you, but this is the way to do it. Don't get discouraged. Books, I love hard science fiction. I'm all about it. So Blindsight is a recent consumption of mine that I really liked. Most people know about Three Body Problem because they've made a Netflix series about it, but it's another excellent one. I don't know if I'd consider it hard science necessarily, but The Children of Time is also a recent read by me.
That's one of my favorites. There's 4 books now.
Yes, I'm on Children of Memory, which I found to be a little hard to digest, given it was in a simulation, which was fairly confusing. But yeah, I'm a big fan.
Yeah, that's the worst one. Don't give up on it because of that. The one that was just released, spectacular.
Oh, excellent. That's next on my reading list, so that works out.
Thank you for listening to Project Gamma, presented by GammaForce.io. If you've enjoyed this podcast, check us out on your favorite podcast platform for future episodes.